Hi everyone, this is Bathymetrics, and today I'm going to be talking about some gotchas and tricks and tips for dealing with audio editing in Bitwig. And as with all of my videos in this series, I'm specifically trying to talk to people that are very familiar with Ableton Live and how clip editing and audio editing works there, versus the kind of confusion and things you're going to run into when you try to do similar things in Bitwig. Bitwig is a lot more capable and flexible and less destructive in terms of its audio editing, but there's a few things that you'll try to do at first that'll just drive you absolutely crazy. So let me show you the first thing you're going to run into if you're coming over to Bitwig from Ableton. Here we're looking at live. We have a simple clip. Okay, and a common thing we like to do with clips is do some editing of fades and whatnot, and maybe do something like a split and drag the border of the split over, maybe do another fade of some sort. Over here we'll do a really long fade, and you work to get your audio editing just the way you like it with fades and clips like this. And then it's very common to just select both of them and say, okay, I like this. And I want to Control J to consolidate and turn it into one clip. And the consolidated clip keeps your edits with all the fades and whatnot, right? So we're very used to this, and this is very destructive. We've changed that clip forever. This is now the new sample inside of that clip. There's no way to undo it. It's down here in the editor. It's permanent. Okay, so the first time you try to do this in Bitwig, here's what's going to happen. I have a simple kind of percussive loop here. Let's listen to it for a sec. Let's also make this track a little bigger so you can see what's going on. We'll just stick with the kind of merged mono view of it for this video. So here's what this clip sounds like. Okay, now let's say I want to do the same thing I just did in Ableton. I'm going to split it here, Control E, and make this a little smaller. Gonna adjust some fades, maybe curve that fade a little bit, adjust another fade, curve that fade a different way. Okay, you got all these typical tricks you can do. Over here, I'll take a long fade, drag it way over. So now we say, great, we like the way this looks and sounds. Let's consolidate these two clips. So I select both of them and I do Control J to consolidate. And wait a minute, what the hell just happened? You're going to run into this a few times, guarantee it. I sure did. I even emailed tech support and said, it's a bug. You need to fix this. It needs to work like Ableton, but it doesn't really work like Ableton, and there's a really good reason for it. And tech support at Bitwig is great. As long as you email them at support@bitwig.com, you'll always get through to them, and they're really good about replying. At least for me, they've been really good about replying to my requests for enhancement and my bug tickets and so on. But they explain this isn't a bug. This is as designed, and it revolves around the much more powerful and flexible way that Bitwig does its audio editing and thinks about audio clips versus audio events. So let me back up a little bit. We'll just go back to the original clip with a couple Control Z's. Okay, so let's explain the big difference between a Bitwig clip and an Ableton clip. In Ableton, flip back over here to Ableton, a single clip on a track is basically the sample. It's the sample you dragged into Ableton, and this is a sample. It's one thing. And when you go into the sample editor, you can see all the start and end of the sample, the parameters of the sample, some basic things you can do, so on and so forth. In Bitwig, it's a very, very different paradigm. In Bitwig, a clip that you see on your track or over in the clip launcher, if we were to copy drag this into clip launcher, be the same thing here. This is a series of events. It's a container for several different samples. Now, by default, when you first drag a new sample into Bitwig, like let's just grab this one. drag it in. Sorry for the noise. Let's turn that off so that doesn't happen again. We'll double click to, I'm sorry, we'll zoom it to the screen here. Okay, when you drag a clip into Bitwig, or rather when you drag a sample into Bitwig, it puts it inside of a clip. And Bitwig calls the samples an audio event. If you look at this button down here. So the sample is an event, and then the sample or the event is inside of a clip, which is this big container here. Now this is important because what Bitwig lets you do that, for example, Ableton doesn't. Let me put this up on the same track as the original drum loop. So these are two different samples inside of two different clips. And briefly, I'll show you what this track versus clip is down here. If I click the track, it can show me all the clips on a track, and I can get them side by side and shrink and zoom, get them all into view at the same time. And I can actually do things like put a big cut in the middle of this clip, like I'm going to cut this here, delete this one little chunk of the original sample, the original event that was in this clip. And then I come over here and cut a chunk, Control E, and I can just literally drag that right over into this clip. And now I've got two different samples inside of the same clip. The clip is a container. And then inside the clip, you can have one or multiple events or samples, okay? So this is really super powerful. And then I could even go further, like I could have started, let's back up a little bit. So here's my two original, let's get rid of the splits. Okay, here's the two clips that I dragged into the same track. And I could double click, well, select both of them and then do Control J to consolidate. And now I've basically automatically put both of those different events, see, different sample names, inside of one clip. And then I can still continue to do the same kind of editing. I could, for example, just drag this over and overwrite everything up to bar 3-ish of that one, right? I could then do a split. You can split a couple ways. You can double click in the header of the event, like at the appropriate grid line. And the closest grid line, like if I do right here between these two, let me zoom in a little bit, show you. Well, see, it makes more grids when I zoom in too far. But if I put my cursor right about here in between the first and second quarter note of bar 6, and I double click right in the middle, it's still going to try and jump to the nearest major division and do the split there. So if I undo that and instead I come right here to the middle and, select right in the middle of those two things, and then I do Control E, I can get a more, granular split. So you'll find different ways of just finding how to split in ways that make sense to you. I'm sorry, I should do it this way. Let's go in here. It's better to work on the clip mode and get rid of this track header when you're doing like event splitting and editing. So here, let's do it again. I'm going to split between the first and second quarter note of bar 7. If I double click in this part right in the middle, see, it's going to try and do it on the grid. It's just, it knows that there's another division in there. So found the closest 16th note for the split. So generally you can trust just double clicking to split and you'll get reasonable splits like that. But like I said, you can also just, select any spot in the that you want and then do Control E and split that way. And if we zoom in, you can still see that it's trying to, well, see, that one was actually off grid. So depending on where you actually place your select mark, like if I put it right there in between those two and split again, see, you can do a split between grid marks. So either way, depending on how surgical you want to get, you'll figure out the way that makes sense to you. But again, I've just made some chops in my two different clips. I'll get rid of a couple pieces here and there. I'll drag maybe, let's see, I can do a time selection and split that, right? And then drag this time selection over, put it here, and so on. If you want to reverse a clip, let's zoom in a little bit. This will be confusing because you think, I'm sorry, not reverse an event. See, I'm still used to talking in Ableton terms, so I'm going to reverse this one event or this one chunk of an event. If I right-click this, I expect to see reverse on here. Why don't I see reverse? Can Bitwig not reverse, right? That's the next thing you're going to run into a lot if you're coming over from Ableton. So the trick here is when you're working in the event editor, you highlight the event you want and you come up here to the event button up on top, and there's your reverse. Boom. Okay, we can reverse it now. So a good tip is to find your reverse thing and pin it so that it's now just a special button you can remind you that it's up here. And then again, I could come in here, zoom in a little further on this one, take this one drum hit here, Control E to split it out, and then make sure it's selected and come up here and click reverse, and now it's reversed, right? So that's your basic reversal behavior. And the concept that you can mix and match multiple samples inside of a single clip. Now here's another good shortcut. You know, you're zooming, you're moving around, everything's all panned out because you're zoomed in super far. You can't see what's what. Anytime you want to see your entire clip down here in this editing window, just go up to the top one and double click the original clip, and it'll basically make the start and end of this clip fit within the span of this window. So that's always a good kind of reset, is to double click up here. You can also double click the same kind of thing here if you're in track mode, where you're seeing the little track representation of this clip up here. You can also just double click this one. Like, let's say I zoom in way far and then I double click here, it'll zoom it all back too. So whether you click up here on the clip in track mode, or whether you turn on track here so you can see the same kind of thing here, right? Either one of those you can double click to bring your zoom back to seeing the entire clip. Okay, let's see. So let's talk about how to do fades and actually bake those fades into this clip. I'm going to start over. Let's see, let's zoom out. Let's just delete this clip entirely. Let's bring it in again. Which one were you? This one? Probably this one. Okay, and then I'm going to select it. And I have a shortcut key assigned to zoom because I like to always see my waveform nice and clear. So let's say we want to do the fade thing and we want to bake it in. We want to make sure it stays put. The way to do that is to work at the audio event level. This is the ideal way to do it. Now, first I'll show you the non-ideal way to do it. Let me just turn off. I use shortcut keys for all my different detail views down here. Like, this is seeing my devices, this is seeing my automation, this is seeing the clip editor, the event editor. I usually just turn them on and off with shortcut keys. So let's say you're here and we want to do that same kind of thing we did before. I'm going to split the clip. I'm going to make this one shorter. I'm going to adjust some fades visually, because a lot of us like to work this way when you're in detailing mode and you want to see how one clip looks relative to another clip. Like, maybe you got a kick right here, and maybe this is a bass type of clip, and you want to just fade the bass out of the way and do sort of manual side chaining or manual ducking for clips. So some of us are used to working this way at times for certain things. And you know, you may want to get everything all lined up here, just working in your track, seeing all your clips together and just, you know, nudging things and moving things and doing whatever. And then you want to bake this in, right? You don't want to keep all these fades in here. You want to bake it in so you can duplicate this clip in other places further along in your arrangement, right? So we saw that selecting both of these and doing Control J to consolidate just loses everything, right? All consolidate does is say, take all of the events inside of me or the different clips that are selected and make them one clip. And any events that were inside the original clips, make them all part of this new clip, right? In exactly the form they were, but it gets rid of fades. And again, this is per design. At this track level, this clip level, the fades are mainly meant to handle things like if the clip is split at a point that isn't a zero crossing of the waveform, you typically want to put in a little microfade to force that clipped right in the middle waveform to actually start at a zero crossing by doing a tiny little microfade. And in fact, let's show you that real quick. If you select any clip and you go up to clip and you choose this thing called auto fade, which I actually keep a button for because sometimes I use it. If I click auto fade and then we zoom in really close here and take a look, it put this really nice super short fade on both ends of the clip. And if you want to see how long the fade is, you can select the clip and look over here in the inspector. And here's the fade in and fade out. So it's a 0.07 of whatever this time value is. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's like based on 16th notes. So like a 16th note can be split into 100%. So this is like 7% of a 16th note. Anyway, it doesn't tell you in terms of milliseconds, but if I were to take this value in the inspector and shorten it, you can see it actually affects the clip. So you can make a really tiny, tiny microfade if you want, or you can make a longer microfade. But either way, the point is, if we had split this clip right here, in fact, let's do it. Let's split this clip right here, right in the middle of that, okay? This is typically what you don't want because this will make a click whenever the clip starts because you're not at a zero crossing. So again, if we select the clip and we'll reset all the fades to just pull off the one on the other end, and then I'm going to click my auto fade button again. See how it just pulls it down to a nice perfect little zero crossing there? Okay, so I like the default microfade values that they use. You can adjust them if you want. If you feel like that's too long, you can do that. But see, now we start having enough energy right at the beginning that you're getting into clicking territory when this clip starts. So that's why I say their default value is usually pretty good. Their default of 0.007 for the fade in and fade out. So this happens at the clip level out in the arranger, and it's not this fade that you put on a clip on the outer clip container is not visible here in at the event level. Well, I mean, it kind of is. You're kind of seeing the effect of that, right? So if I come back here and I do that, right, you're seeing it affect the event too, but it's not in the event. So again, if I were to take this clip, this parent container, and consolidate it, watch what happens down here to the event. If I consolidate this, it just gets rid of the fades because every time you make a new container called a clip, it resets the fades basically. It'll keep any cuts you have, any splits and cuts. Like if I were to gap out something here, let's zoom in again and let's gap this out too. Control E, and then we'll just delete it, right? And now if I take these two clips and consolidate them, see it preserves the gapping, right? And it bakes that into the new clip. Come here. It bakes that gap in, but this is interesting. All it did was kind of nicely cut that event for us. Under the covers, I could still spread that event out and get it all back to its original length and content, right? So that's a useful thing to know, right? It's just when you Control J, it resets the fades on the parent clip container, and all it preserves is any kind of gapping or cutting that you did up here. And you can't reverse something here. Like you can't. Let's zoom in a little bit on this one hit. If I select that one hit there's no reverse. See, there's no reverse that time, that selected set of time. There's nothing here, edit. See, there's no reverse. That's because you don't reverse a portion of a container. You reverse the events inside that container, inside that clip. So I hope you're getting the point by now that a Bitwig clip, when you say clip, it's a very, very different conceptual thing than an Ableton clip. An Ableton clip means sample. In Bitwig, clip means container for samples. Okay, so how do we bake in the fades if we wanted to work in this kind of old school way, this Ableton way of, visually clipping things, splitting things, doing fades, maybe even doing crossfades. Let's bring in a whole different clip here just to show you an example. Like, let me drag something else out. No, let's make it something other than a drum track. Do I have any? Okay, that looks different enough. Okay, so we're going to take this and we're going to split this. We're going to drag this up here. Okay, so now we've mixed two different types of material. And let's say I want to do a crossfade right here. Crossfading is interesting because if I just do it like you think of in Ableton and I drag this way to make a crossfade, Ableton lies a little bit about this, but Bitwig tells you the truth about what's happening. It's like, well, you took this fade marker from this one clip and you're trying to cross it over into the previous clip and do a crossfade. But since these two clips don't overlap in any way, there's nothing for me to crossfade, right? There's just nothing for me to do. So all it's really doing is the same thing as a fade on this end of this clip. And it's not really dragging under the covers anything from this clip and crossfading it into this one. So how do we make a crossfade work, right? Well, the trick is you start with the clip you want and you drag its border up here, you drag it into the other clip. And now see, since there's nothing here, because this is where I kind of started the clip, if I drag this out this way, see I can't drag this, there's no more clip here. What I could do is move it over, right, inside of this clip container, because right now this is the clip, so we're in this container. And so I can reposition or stretch this clip. I could even keep, let's try this, even keep sliding it, as long as I don't drag over into the other clip down here in the editor. See, I can reposition this any way I want. There's even a nice trick where, see how this clip has transient markers in it, these little blue onset markers or transient markers? There's a function in the event button called slide waveform to previous and next onset. So watch what happens. Let me actually pin these open for you so I can actually kind of show it like this. So here I am in this clip, and let's say you're just running through the transition and listening, and you're trying to figure out where you want this clip to run into this clip and where you want, this interior clip to start. Let me make this a different color just so it's easier to keep them straight. So you can use these if you've selected the event down here. So now we have the event menu and the two event buttons. Watch what happens when I click this button. Watch down here and also watch up here. And then I can go backwards. And what this is doing, this is really nice, especially if you're trying to edit together several different drum loops or, make your own custom kind of chopped and re-sequenced drum loop, is if there's onset markers or transient markers here in a clip, let's zoom in a little bit right here. If there's onset markers, these blue things, you can see them a little more better if I go into onsets mode, and now there's a line for each one of them. But if I use this button, watch how it'll just if I go to next onset, it's going to jump this next onset to the very start of the clip. And then it's going to jump this onset to the very start of the clip, and so on. So this is one way to jump around in a drum clip, like right on the transients if you want. Or again, you can just grab the clip up here and, or rather down here, zoom out a little bit. You can just grab the clip itself in the header and shift it around that way, and so on. So anyway, the point is we need to have whatever audio event, whatever sample is the first sample in this clip, we need to make sure that it overlaps with this sample a little bit. So right now it's not even touching, now it's touching, and now I'm starting to overlap into the other clip. Okay, so now if I do up here, if I do a crossfade at the clip level, you're going to start seeing it actually crossfade that sample. Let's drag this to overlap even more. Okay, and now we'll do a crossfade here again. Okay, now you're seeing a real crossfade, and you can see this material right here is the crossfaded material from the part of this sample that's overlapping this sample in the neighboring clip. Okay, so the thing about crossfades that'll throw you off a little bit at first is they don't really work unless there's an overlap. And there's a couple ways to get that overlap. Again, if I drag this out into its own track and I pull it all the way out to the border so we can see the whole start and end of the clip, right? You could do a thing like this. You could say, I want to start here, right? So you could just drag this border in and then make it fit the gap. And then drag this border in, make it fit the gap, and then just tuck it up there. Whoops. Tuck it up there and bring this back next to it again. Okay. And then now if I do a crossfade, there's overlapping material because, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff on the other side of this here, right? So if I crossfade, again, we have a real crossfade of two different kinds of content. All right, so that'll be a little confusing with crossfades until you really wrap your head around this. But so let's put in some fades. We're going to put in a crossfade here. We're going to take this one and we're just going to do a big old fade. We'll do a big old fade here and we'll scoop it down. And we'll do a big old fade here. All right, so let's say we've done this kind of editing visually out in our arranger. And now you want to bake all this in, like in Ableton when you do Control J. Well, in Bitwig, the trick is to just do bounce in place. Now, before I bounce in place, let me show you what the bounce looks like. And we'll bounce to a new track. So I'm going to select all three clips, or you can select all three clips this way by making sure you have your crosshair and just drag across all of them. Okay, so if I do a bounce to a new track, and if you remember from my other videos, always bounce in 32-bit pre-fader. That's always best when you're working in a project. You don't want to be changing from floating point to fixed point on every bounce, or you're losing fidelity and creating truncation distortion. Go watch my video on dithering to understand that, but just remember this. When you're bouncing and doing things inside of your project, stick with 32-bit floating point, and it doesn't matter whether you select dither or not, because when you're bouncing to 32-bit, dither is just automatically disabled, even if it looks like it's enabled, because there's no point in dithering if you're bouncing to floating point. Okay, so anyway, we're going to bounce. And you'll see that when it bounced, it preserved all of those moves, right? The waveform looks the same. It's still three separate clips. Okay, so that's one thing to note, is it'll still be three separate clips, but then if we consolidate these clips, Control J, now it looks like you would expect. It's one single clip. It's still got the original events inside of it. Still got those three events, and I could do things like take this one and drag it into the other one? No, I guess not. Yeah, did it chop this clip? Interesting. Let's find out. Yeah, it totally chopped that clip. So it's truly a destructive consolidation. It's kind of permanent changes to the individual samples inside of the clip. Let's see what happens if we just bounce in place this time. So we're going to grab all 3 clips. Oops, that one too. And this time we're going to do bounce in place, which basically means do it on the same track. If there were any processing devices on this track, it wouldn't bake in. Oh gosh, I'm going to have to go down a rat hole to explain that. Let's do that. Let's undo. Let's explain bounce and bounce in place. I talked about this briefly in another video, but it's really kind of interesting. So I'm on this track, and let's say that I put in some EQ curves, and let's say that I put in, I don't know, some dynamic. Let's get rid of you. Let's put in some sort of dynamics to add it to it. Let's put in a different compressor like Pro C, just to show a VST being used there. Okay, so if I bounce a clip, if I bounce a track to a new track, and you can do it 2 ways. You can select the clips, or you can select a segment of time. So like I'll just time select all 3 of these clips, and either way, the time or the clip menu has a bounce or bounce in place option. So let's bounce to a new track and watch what happens. Bounce pre-fader, it kind of goes through it in real time, and on the new track, those 2 processing effects have been baked in to the clip, and they're just gone on the new track, right? This is kind of how it works in Ableton if you do a freeze and flatten, is you end up with a new track like this, or you end up with a track like this, and all the original devices are gone, and their processing has been baked into the new bounced clip, or the new flattened clip in Ableton terms. But bounce in place is really cool, because if we, now remember we have 2 devices here. If I bounce in place this selected chunk of time, I need to go back here and reselect that chunk of time, or reselect those clips. There we go. So bounce in place is going to consolidate the samples and the clip itself, but it isn't baking in the processing. And this is amazing. This is so good, because sometimes you don't want to commit to the processing just yet. Maybe you want to clean up a clip and get it all into this nice consolidated chunk where you've built your fades and you've eyeballed everything and it's perfect, and now you want to dupe this out a bunch of places, but you're not sure about your processing yet. So bounce in place on an audio clip basically only affects the audio clip, and this processing is just still being applied in real time to the new audio clip. It hasn't been baked into the new audio clip, and that's just fantastic, right? Now, if it's a MIDI clip, it's kind of a similar thing, but the way it works, if this were a MIDI track and right in front of these 2 processor devices was a synth or a sampler with a MIDI clip up here, and I did bounce in place, what it would end up with is a new audio track, and it would get rid of the synth or the sampler, but it would still leave all the processing after that point. In other words, bounce in place always takes whatever the sound generator is, whether it's raw samples like we're working with in this video, or whether it's a synth or sampler. It'll take whatever the sound generator is and turn that into a bounced, flattened audio clip, but it will leave all the processing devices that came after it. I could demonstrate that, but I won't. You can experiment with that on your own. So anyway, that's what bounce in place is for. And all of this so far has been talking about if you really want to work in the Ableton way and eyeball a clip, eyeball your fades, eyeball your gapping, eyeball this and that and the other thing, and then you just want to make that a new clip, destructive, changes baked in. That's how you do it, is you do bounce in place. Okay. And if you want to bake it in and also bake in whatever processing you had on that track, then what you want to do instead is bounce to a new track and then just take that new track's clip and drag it up in place of the old one and delete your processing devices or just delete the old clip or whatever. Okay, so yeah, you can bake these in or not. It's your choice depending on which one of those bounce options you pick. But this is destructive bouncing. It's point of no return bouncing. And some of us like to work that way. We like to commit. We like to force ourselves to keep moving forward. But Bitwig gives you a lot of flexibility to do it other ways. So let's start from scratch again. Let's just get rid of both of these. Let's go bring back one of these pixels loops. That's an instrument track. Let's do it here. Okay, so let's say you want to do this in a less destructive way. Let's say you want to create some gapping. So I'm going to create a gap there. Now, that's one way you could do it, but look at what's happening down in the clip editor. If we're in the track mode and we zoom out a little bit, you can just see that all we basically did was change the boundary of the parent container. And as you changed the boundary of the parent container, it also shortens or truncates the individual sample under it. So that's all we really did. Okay, let's undo. And instead, what I want to encourage you to experiment with and wrap your head around in Bitwig is a very non-destructive type of editing that always gives you the ability to go back and yet it is very portable. So I have one clip and I want to do some really micro editing to this clip. And then I want to be able to duplicate this clip by just Control-D'ing it out into different places in my arrangement. Well, again, in Ableton, you have to do the edits, commit to those edits and bake it in with either a freeze and flatten or with a, well, that's about the only way you could do it, or with a Control-J if it's audio, right? You have to do your edits and then destructively commit them. Can't go back, ever. But in Bitwig, since this is just a container for samples or events inside of it, you can do all that in a non-destructive way, and yet the parent clip is still portable. So watch this. I'm going to, instead of doing all my cuts and fades out here at the clip level, I'm going to come down here to the audio editor, and I'm going to do them at the event level, the level of audio events, right? So here's the clip out here, the parent clip. This shows me the events inside the clip. And you want to make sure you're selecting and doing things here at the event level. So let's zoom this out just a tinge. Double click, come in here, and I'm going to do a split in, this is in the event. I make sure I'm in audio events, right? So Control-E, another Control-E, right? And then I select the event and delete the event to create a gap. Now again, under the covers, all that information's still there, right? Another way I can split the clip again is by just double clicking at the point I want to split. Okay, that's one way to do it. Control-Z. I can also select a chunk of time and I could take that selected chunk of time and do Control-E to split it. And then remember, I could do things like, let's do a reverse in here. So we've reversed the samples, this section of this event, right? Now let's take this one and let's do a fade. Let's do a big fade. Let's take this one and do a big fade this way. And let's take this one and do a big old fade this way, okay? So we've got our fades. We've got our gapping. You saw it happening in real time up here, but all of this is non-destructive. We have some reverses. It's all non-destructive. And yet this parent clip, if I zoom out a little bit, we can dupe this, drag it around to different parts of our project, and it's just the same thing, right? So it's portable. and it's reversible, it's non-destructive. Or I could come in here and make a slight adjustment to a fade. Or I could say, you know what, I don't like that reverse. Let's undo that reverse. So I'll come up here and just reverse it again. Okay, and look at these two shapes. I set this back to normal, non-reversed, and I made this shape here. If I go over to this clip, it's the old changes, right? So you can even do variations very easily this way by just, making changes to one clip and then, come here, and then duping this clip out into a new instance of itself, change its color, and make slight edits or variations to what you did, right? And so now I've got two slightly different clips that were very easy to create. And again, it would have been hard to do this in Ableton. Really think about this. In Ableton, you would have had to Control J this clip, and that would have baked in all these fades and gaps and reverses. It would have baked it in destructively, irreversibly. So there's no way to duplicate that consolidated clip and then do slight variations of those same edits, right? Because you've baked in the edits. There's no way to get back to this point again. So think about this as you're working with Bitwig or as you're considering Bitwig, and just understand that it's very, very, very flexible and powerful once you wrap your head around the differences. So the main thing I would suggest is, instead of being in the habit of editing clips up here in the arranger view, try and force yourself to get in the habit of editing a clip down here in this view by working directly on the samples themselves. And again, of course, it's just awesome that you can do totally different things, like, I don't know, these are all percussion loops. Let's just find something like a bass loop. Oh, really? Snares are basses? No, they're not. There's a damn bass loop. Oh, seriously? What is going on with you? Let's try bass loop. That's, come on, why are you stuck in hi-hats? What the hell have I selected here? Yeah, should be everything. Oh. Let's go to location. Well, these must be in a folder that says bass loop somewhere. That's why they're showing up here. So let's just dig around. That's what I expect to see. So that's a drum loop. Come on, why are you stuck on drum loops? Where's my bass stuff? All right, well, there's an ARP loop. That'll work. So let's say you have an ARP loop and you want to mix and match this with some other clip you have, right? So again, when you're in this this view of the editor where you select the whole track, you can see all of the clips and you can zoom in and out. And this is helpful when, for example, you want to just clip out, one little, zoom in a little bit, just pick something short like this, clip this out, zoom back out. Now I'm going to drag this clip right over here. I'm sorry, drag that event, that little chopped out portion of that event. I'm going to drag it right in here. And now if I double click on this clip and take a look, there's that new bass clip. This new little chunk out of this bass sample is now right here. And again, you can zoom in and look closely, see what your zero crossings look like. All right, see how that's starting at a non-zero point? So here, I can come right into the event and just add a little manual fade and even curve it up a little bit if I want. Make it a little longer if I want. You can even go so far as to select the event and then look over here at the fade in and fade out values for the event. Interesting, why aren't you showing me fade in and fade out? That might be a bona fide bug. I would expect it to be showing me those values. I guess because it's a manually set fade. Interesting. Well, anyway, let's say I get rid of it entirely. You can also select the event and do auto fade to just automatically put in that 7 millisecond microfade to either one. Your choice. You can adjust it any way you want, but the point is, since it was at a not zero crossing, you typically want some kind of fade on it. And that'll make it sit more nicely as it rolls through with the other clips. We can check out the ending here. Again, there's an auto fade on it, so it'll be fine. It's effectively going down to 0, but might want to cross it up a little bit like that. Okay, so you have all this fine control. You can mix and match samples inside of a single clip. And then once you've got those samples mixed and matched, you can dupe it out to a different place in your arrangement and zoom in again and go to that new clip. Let's just make it a new color. And sometimes it's easier to just flip over here to clip mode so you're always isolated and zoomed to the one specific clip you're working on. Let's show you that too. So here's all my clips in the arrangement. If I click this green clip, just automatically see when you're in clip mode here, it just automatically focuses whichever full-length clip you click on. The orange one, there's the red one. So I could come in here and now I could take this one and reverse it. And then I could put a longer fade here if I wanted. And then I could say, let's just gap that out. And so now I've got, you know, basically if I get rid of this loop that I dragged in, I've got 3 different clips that all started out as this clip with its original set of edits. And I've made variations of them that are all very powerful. And I've mixed and matched clips. And if you want to visually, you can even, no, you can't colorize the events. Interesting. I thought you could. So you just have to notice that the names are different to understand which samples are actually inside of a clip. But now these are portable, duplicatable, and so on. So it's a very powerful feature. And this is one of the main things you're going to run into with your fades. Now let's talk about a whole different thing. Let's blow this away again. Let's bring in, let's get rid of you. Let's go find, oh, this ARP loop will work. Why not? So we're going to bring in an ARP loop. We're going to zoom in a little bit. Let's do that. So the ARP loop is clearly at 150 BPM. My project's at 110. So let's go over here. I kind of didn't want to do this yet. Let's use something that's actually working at the same tempo as my project. So we're going to maybe come back to this one. Let's go back to pixel. I know these were all at 110. Pixel, drum, loop, 110. Okay, so we'll use this one again because I tested it earlier. Hey, let's make a new track so it's named right. Okay, so this particular loop is at 110. My project's at 110. So if we double click and look really closely, we can see that all the transients are lined up right on the grid with my 16th notes. Okay, let's zoom in there and take a closer look. See, they look pretty good. Ableton and Bitwig are about the same in terms of how accurate they are with their transients. A lot depends on whether or not your project is at the right tempo before you drag a sample in. I actually like to change my project tempo to match the sample, and then that will set the value of the clip or the sample. It will set, if I go into a given warping mode, it'll basically say the original tempo of the sample is the same as whatever my project was set at when I dragged it in. And it's an easy way to make sure you bring in things at the right tempo and get the onsets as close to accurate as possible, these little blue markers. But let's just go back to raw for a minute. And let's look a little more closely at these transient markers. So Ableton and Bitwig are both sometimes good about the transients, sometimes bad. Like here you can see the start of this hit is actually right about here, just slightly after the 2.1.4 beat marker. That's a quarter note. The transient marker for it is over here. And you can adjust the transient markers by clicking the onsets button, which makes these active and editable. And then I could just drag this over to here and line it up. And it's trying to jump kind of sort of to zero crossing, but not really. So sometimes it's nice to use shift while you're dragging this so you can visually just line it up with the actual transient. If you want to be that precise, okay? So I can zoom out again. I can go look at the next transient. And again, this one is a little bit off from where the actual transient starts. So I'll grab it, I'll hold shift, and I'll just move it over here, right? So sometimes, just as with Ableton, if you really want to have super precise warping and stretching within a clip, the first thing you might want to do is come in and double check your transient markers and decide for yourself if you're okay with where they are or if you want to put them, you know, at a good spot for each hit in the ARP. So, you know, you'll notice some of these are pretty much on point, some of them aren't. This is a really nitpicking procedure. It's the same way in Ableton. There's just no easy way around this, but I'm just going to do a few of those and adjust them manually. Okay, so assuming your stretching is good, assuming your onset markers are good, your transient is good, there's a couple interesting things you can do. So one reason for setting really exact transient markers is, what if I wanted to take this hit, this clip, which is a very rhythmic 16th note based arpeggio. Let's see what it sounds like. Turning on my own headphones, they time out after a while. Okay, so it's rhythmic. I'm sorry, it's a drum clip, not an arpeggio. And we might want to do things like chop this out into a drum kit. So you could right click on the clip and you could say slice to drum machine. And so when you slice, one of your options for slicing is you can say slice at onsets. And then if your onsets were very precise, when you slice this to a new drum kit, and you take a look at the drum machine, and you go in and you look at any one of those slices, you know, if you set your transients up right in the first place, then these start markers for each little slice in the total loop will be in the right place. They'll be perfect slices, right? So that's one reason you might want to be very specific about your transient markers before you do slicing. Okay, so that's one reason. Another reason is if you're slicing to a multi-sample, which basically takes the same things and this time plops it into a sampler in a multi-sample that looks like this. And if we go view the multi-sample, you know, if you're setting up a multi-sample by slicing at onsets from an original clip, you're definitely going to want to make sure those onsets are correct, or these samples will be a little sloppy. And again, as you click each one in the set, you can see the actual, you know, start and end of each slice. So sometimes it's a lot easier to fix the onsets first before you do slicing. But that's for slicing, right? Now, what about for stretching? Let's just look at everything from the angle of stretching. And stretching behavior is a little different from Ableton too. Let me go over to Ableton, and we'll talk about stretching this clip. It's already set to be warped. I have no idea what the original tempo was. We'll just assume it was right. One of the things we're used to doing in Ableton is saying, you know what? I've got this dead space at the start of the clip. So the first thing I want to do is come over here to this transient marker, and as you zoom in a little bit so you can see this more clearly, your transient markers are kind of hard to see in Ableton. But as you hover in this area and you get over a transient marker, it allows you to set a warp marker, right? So I might say, well, I've got this dead space at the beginning of the clip, so let me set a warp marker here. By double clicking, and then let me right click that warp marker and choose set 1 here. And so what you've said is this is the start of my clip, and you'll notice, maybe you noticed, that it kind of stretched this out automatically to still fit the original length of the clip. Let's do a little more drastic version of that so you can really see it. Let's zoom in again. Let's start here, somewhere around here, like on this transient. So I'm going to double click this to set a warp marker. Then I'm going to right click it and say set 1 to 1. And I want you to watch what happens up here when I do that. So it basically started it here. The whole thing, it truncated it instead of leaving it the original length, right? So you get into weird behavior, even in Ableton. Sometimes it's a little counterintuitive. I'm going to undo again. This time I'm going to set my transient somewhere around here. Let's go back out to about here. And let's set 1 to here. And see, it still dragged it in. So there's just, it's not always the behavior you expect, right? Even in Ableton. And then from here, if I drag this backward or forward, it's kind of stretching things on either side of the warp marker. Like if you look on this side, it's going to start compressing it as I drag it this way and speeding it up. And over on this side, it's slowing down. If I go this way, and so on and so forth. And it's always from marker to marker, right? And you'll notice as I drag this one in, it's not stretching this side. It's only stretching on this side. Why is that, right? Why does Ableton do that? That's always kind of pissed me off about Ableton. Now, let me show you how it works in Bitwig because it's a little different, but again, it's more powerful in ways, but it's different until you wrap your head around it. So in Bitwig, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's make this a little bigger. Let's get in an editing mode. All right. So the first thing to note is that you do your stretching with this stretch and onsets bit. And it's easier to work in clip mode where you are just editing one event. And you're either seeing the onsets and moving the onsets around like I showed you, like dragging that onset a little bit or just dragging it back. And then the stretching is done when you flip into this mode here. So you still see the onsets, but I can't move the onsets anymore. I can't toggle them and touch them and move them. Now it's only concerned with stretch markers and stretching behavior. So let's make this a little smaller. Let's go to onsets and let me show you what happens when I hover at the edge of the clip, right? I can do my normal clip truncating from either side. I can do my normal clip splitting and reversing and all that stuff, right? Even though I'm in onsets mode, it sort of lets me do all the clip operations, but I can also edit the onsets and adjust them if I want to. But if you're in stretch mode, now when I hover my cursor over here, it's still not doing anything. And that's because we haven't set this clip yet, or this event, to be warpable. So let's select the event. Let's come over here to the area where you set up warping in Bitwig, which is this mode. And we'll pick one of the warping algorithms. I tend to like Elastic Pro. They're all different. This one is one of the more transparent ones. And since this clip was originally 110, I can leave the tempo alone because you can see the onsets are roughly in the right place anyway. And now if I hover over the edge of the clip when I'm in stretch mode, you see how you get this weird dumbbell, barbell type thing, and if I move in the top half, it's this marker, and in the bottom half, it's a different kind of double arrow marker, right? And if I go to onsets mode, I don't have that. It's just, dragging the clip. Actually, it's dragging each onset. You can drag it down here on its line if you want, right? You don't have to select right up here. So stretch mode is the only mode where you're going to see this thing. And notice that this is a double barbell. But if I go to audio event for the whole clip, notice that now it's like only got that little waveform on the left side. It's not a double barbell, it's like a single left-sided barbell. Can you see that? And down here, it's the same thing, right? So we've got basically 3 different types of stretching behavior. So let's talk about the difference. The most common thing you might want to do in a clip like this is say, well, okay, it's 4 bars long, it ends at bar 5.1. And what I want to do for whatever reason, let's just say you want to go right here and you want to do a split. And let's actually do it down in the event itself so it makes more sense. We're going to go to the middle of the first bar and we're going to do a split. And then we're going to get rid of this. And then we want to drag this out and stretch it so that all that's left stretches to fill this full 4-bar pattern. We're going to slow it down and stretch it. Right? That's one thing you might want to do. Now, you might think, well, if I'm in stretch mode here, well, I've got the single-sided barbell, and if I go to this left edge and I drag it, it does exactly what we would expect, and it stretches this remaining stuff to fill, whatever space we want. It's stretching the entire clip. Okay? Now remember, Ableton didn't do this. Let's be a little more drastic and really show you how this works. I'm going to undo a few things. This time I'm going to split it way over here on bar 4. Split this, delete this, and now I'm just going to take this and drag it all the way over here. And look at how much we're slowing down that sample. And we basically, like, it's a 4-bar clip. I split it at bar 4, so we've knocked it into quarter time, right? We've slowed it down by a factor of 4x. So this is a really useful thing. Oops, Control Z. What did I do there? Let's try that again. Now see, when I let go, it popped it over, and that's because, let's go back a little bit. Control Z, this is the other thing you have to know. Before I do that stretching, I probably want to put in a stretch mark here at the end because there's no real stretch marks yet. Should be able to go right down here where there's an onset at the end. Why am I not seeing my onset? Oh, because there isn't an onset at the very end of the clip. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's stick an onset right here at the end. I'm just going to double click right about. Got to go into onset mode. Let's add one more onset manually right here at the end of the clip. Okay. Now I can come down here in stretch mode and add a marker right there. Okay, so now I have a stretch marker there. And now that I have a stretch marker at the end of the clip, if I take this whole thing and drag it over, it should respect and hold on to that end stretch marker. Now see, this is where it gets interesting. So, yeah, I'm going to explain this in a second. Control Z. Normally, you have to be in the audio event for the whole clip. You have to have the whole clip selected to see only this single barbell. If you have the whole clip selected and you're in stretch mode, once you've got at least 2 beat markers or any kind of beat markers in the clip, transient markers, stretch markers, whatever you want to call them, then you always get this double barbell when you have stretch mode selected. But if you click the audio event, those markers are still there, but it gives us a single barbell, which lets me stretch the whole clip out, and this time it'll stay in place. Right? It didn't try to snap everything over and just shorten the clip and truncate it all in this direction. So again, sometimes I still catch myself with this. It's like, okay, let's go back one. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. All right. Oops, one more. All right. So I don't have any stretch markers in here at all. I don't have any. I have this one at the beginning. There's always one at the beginning, but there isn't one at the end. See how when I just hover over this clip in stretch mode, we see a little tiny gray thing down here, which is this stretch marker. But there is kind of one here, but it's also kind of hidden. It's not kind of not there, sort of kind of not there. And if I go into event mode and I do a big split way over here, Control E, and I get rid of this, right? There is a marker here, but it's not tied to a transient in any way. So if I try to stretch this out, it's gonna, well, that time it kept it. I don't know. Whatever you do, if you want to stretch, the basic idea is double check in stretch mode that you've got some kind of beat marker over at the end, and then that'll stay sticky. And when you stretch everything, it will take the whole clip and leave that right side anchored wherever that beat marker is, right? So now it's truly stretched out. Now, the other thing, the other symbol is, let's go into stretch mode. Let's put a beat marker right here. So now I have a beat marker. I'm going to put another beat marker right here by double clicking. So I've got 4 beat markers, the start, the end, and 2 in the middle. Now, this double barbell thing is kind of like the way stretch markers work in Ableton. If let's zoom in a little bit so you can really see this. So here's our 4 markers. If I take this marker and I stretch it this way, it's going to slow down what's on this side of the clip. It's going to speed up what's on this side of the marker. And it's anchored by this other marker. Like this section isn't going to change at all. Let me undo that. Watch this section really carefully and see how it stays the same, but watch how this section speeds up and shrinks and this slows down and stretches. If I grab with the barbells up here. Okay. That stretches out, this compresses, and this stays totally the same. So that's what the double barbells do, is they kind of say, well, on either side of the beat marker, compress and expand, or compress and expand depending on which direction you're dragging in. And they have these handy little colored indicators at the bottom. If you notice this orangish color and this bluish color here, the farther you stretch it in either direction, the more dense and bright those colors get, right? Because you're really, really doing crazy things to the sample at that point, right? And so this is an indicator of if it's orange, it's slowed down. If it's blue, it's speeded up. Okay, so that's a good visual indicator that also shows you how far you've stretched from the original. And there's also another nice trick. If you're in here and you go to event, there's an unstretch option. So watch what happens. If I keep doing unstretch, one should have done it. Yeah, I'm wondering why I still have a little bit of blue here. See, there's no color on these 2 clips anymore, but there's a little bit here. I'm not sure why that is. That might just be a visual bug, because I think the whole thing's been completely unstretched now. So this is the one type of behavior. Let's do a stretch on that one. Let's do another stretch on this one. So we've made this section really kind of expanded and this compressed. Orange, orange, blue. Slow, slow, fast. Okay, now we're going to do event unstretch, and it should undo all of those, not just the last one I did. Nope, it undoes them one at a time. So if I keep going, or maybe it only undoes the last one. Doesn't seem to be, oh, does it work based on the marker you're on? Honestly, I haven't dug this close before. Yes, it's going to unstretch based on whatever marker you have selected. That's nice. So if I select that front one and unstretch, now the whole thing's back to normal. Okay, that's cool. I learned something in this video. So one type of stretching is this with the double barbell. Now, as you move down this way, it turns into this double arrow, you know, top half double barbell, bottom half double arrow, and it's really the same as these. Now, watch what happens here. When you move the actual beat marker itself, it stretches in a way that a lot of us want, which is, let's undo. You know, let's say for whatever reason in this drum loop, I don't like, I'm gonna go back to audio event for a second, and let's just say I don't like those two hits. So I clip them out, and I get rid of them. Now, I want to stretch this one hit right here to fill this entire gap. I want this one beat to fill this gap up to here and leave everything else the same. Well, I can't be in my sort of slice and dice edit mode and stretch it out because it just puts those two beats back again, right? That's not what we want. So we want to go into stretch mode. We want to make sure we have a beat marker right here at the start of this hit. So I'm just going to click down here to set a new beat marker. And now I can take this one, which has the single barbell, drag it out, and I'm just going to fill in that gap. It's just slowing down that one beat, okay? So again, this is a really surgical kind of stretching, just in one tiny beat of an entire clip, and everything else is staying at tempo. Another thing that you might find useful is, let's say you've set up a clip and you've stretched the whole thing, like, oh, how should I demo this? Let's say I change my tempo of the project just a little bit. I'm going to undo a few times, get back to where we were. I just wait until all the colors are gone. There we go. All right. So I don't even need these beat markers anymore. Let's get rid of that one. What is it? Double click to delete. Okay, so I've just got a start and an end marker. And let's say that I brought this clip in at 110, but now I'm going to change my project tempo to 140. Now the clip itself hasn't changed, and it's automatically being stretched to 140 because I'm still in my Elastic Pro mode, and it knows that its original tempo is 110. So even though I've increased the project tempo to 140, it was dynamically stretching this clip as we went. Let's see if we can visually see it. Will it show it? No, because it's just based on project tempo, right? But let's say for some reason you wanted to get rid of the entire first bar of this clip and play some games, this event. So I'm going to come in here and split and delete and stretch to fill that gap. And now you can see all of our transient markers are off grid, right? Because it's the same number of 16th notes as before, minus the bit that I just clipped out. And now for whatever reason, let's say that you wanted to start adjusting these transients to actually fall on the grid again. So this is a nice shortcut. You stay here in stretch mode, and as you hover near where a transient is or an onset, you'll see you get this little gray thing right there. As I hover here, I get a gray thing. Now, you don't have to click to create this or double click to create this and then drag it over to line up with a transient. You don't have to do that. Instead, like, let's say I want to put this one on grid now. You can just hover until you see the gray thing and then just click and drag and let go. And it does it that way too. So it's super fast for like lining up your transients and getting them right on a grid. I could just keep scrolling to the right here and going one beat at a time. Just click, drag, hover till I see the marker, click, drag. Super fast, way, way, way faster than trying to do this in Ableton. Okay. And then at some point, since I don't have the same number of 16th notes I had before, I don't know, maybe I want to take this one here, and maybe I want to just drag it over here and stretch this note out to make up the difference as I go. And then I can go back to putting these on grid again. Okay, just hover till I see it, click drag, hover till I see it, click drag, it snaps, and so on. So really, really useful editing tricks. Again, you can take any given note and stretch it out. Oh, this is an interesting thing. So you'll notice I'm trying to stretch this one beat marker, and it will only go so far because it says, well, you still got this old section here, and I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm just going to stretch it to the boundaries that I'm able to. There's like a certain distance it will stretch, and it won't go any farther. So again, if you want to fix that, you have to do something like select a section and cut it out. And instead of dragging this over, because it still won't go any farther, right? It's got a kind of certain percentage that it'll stretch and no more. So instead of dragging down here, you go up here until you have, and again, if you've got a lot of beat markers in here and you're in stretch mode, you're only going to see the double barbell, which does this weird kind of stretching, right? And still has a certain constrained boundary to how far it'll go. That's not what you want, so Control Z. Instead, make sure you're in event mode, and now you can stretch this entire hit all the way over to snap up against that one. And that's actually stretched, right? So you got to wrap your head around this. You got to experiment. And the main thing I want to point out, let's recap really quick. We'll start with stretching and we'll work backward. For stretching, you get one type of stretching behavior when you're in stretch mode. You get this double barbell, which does a compress and expand on either side of wherever you're dragging, right? Compress and expand on either side of where you're dragging. Okay, and then if you're in audio event mode, you get the single barbell, which lets you stretch a clip over other things, and it's more of the kind of intuitive stretch you think of, right? So single barbell does one type of stretching, and it's good for the borders of a sample, the borders of an event. That's where you get the single barbell. You won't see it anywhere else, but if you're in stretch mode, you'll see these double barbells on any beat marker, and they do this expand, contract kind of in a symmetrical way on either side of the beat marker. And then finally, the third way you have to stretch is to go down to the double arrows and drag the beat marker itself to get a slightly different kind of stretching behavior, but there's only a certain amount that it will stretch because it still has to preserve what's on either side of it. So again, if you're down here and you're going, wait, I want to stretch this head out to fill this whole gap, just remember you have to go back to audio event mode, cut out the thing that you want to stretch into. Or actually, you don't even have to cut it out at this point. I could just go here and then drag over to cover it. And now I've stretched this one out to cover that one. So three different types of stretch mode, one here, two different ones here in stretch. And it's all based on understanding what these little double barbell or single barbell markers mean. Okay? Very tricky stuff. But once you wrap your head around it, it's very flexible. Now, onsets, you have to be in onsets mode to actually change an onset, right? And if you want it to snap to grid, you don't do anything. And if you want it not to snap to grid, you just hold shift and you can adjust it very surgically. And then for the editing, I've already gone over that, so I won't beat that dead horse. So now let's talk about the last thing, which is clip automation, clip-based automation versus track automation. So in Ableton, when you're working in a clip and you have to click this little button here to show the envelopes box. And you have a few basic things you can do. You can do a clip-based volume modulation. You can do pitch shifting or transposition modulation by semitones, and you can do sample offset. And then I think depending on your warping mode that you're using, you get some other types of modulation, like if you're in one of the creative warping modes, like texture is a favorite of everyone. Yeah, see, now I can do grain and flux modulation. And in Ableton, when you hear the word automation, that's track automation up in the arranger. When you hear the word modulation, that's like track automation, but now it's inside the clip and it's portable with the clip. So if I do, isn't there pan? Where the hell's pan? I thought there was pan inside the clip. Why am I not seeing pan? I expect to see pan. Let's go back to beats. Wasn't pan there? I guess not. Well, I guess you can't do pan automation inside a clip in Ableton. But you know, you do that here. It's very obvious. I'm not going to go over that because you're an Ableton user. In Bitwig, let's talk about how this works. So let's zoom out. Here's how you do the clip-based modulation in Bitwig. There's gain, pan, which I like a lot, pitch, and formant. And depending on the sample you're working with, pitch will obviously work on everything, but formant will be a little more obvious on some samples and less obvious on others because of the way a formant works. But these are basically the four types of modulation you can do at the clip level. So let's use pan for my example. Oh, and it's worth noting, if you go into pitch or something, you might not see the whole range in the default view because it shows you a nice wide grid for the semitones. So if you're doing pitch or formant modulation, you might want to make this grid larger so you can truly see the plus and minus 24 semitone range. The other option you have, of course, is to just work in the big editor window with Shift Tab. And now I've got the same stuff up here. I'm still in pitch, but now if I make my window as big as possible by closing my device window at the same time, you know, you could be working in clip mode, and then you could come in here to the big editor, come back to clip mode, come back to the big editor, and so on. Nice thing about the big editor, and that's called edit. That's this button here. See, here's the regular mode. Here's the editor. This is the mixer view. But for the editor, the nice thing about that is you can see your clip-based automation and fades and stretching and modulation and so on at the same time that you're looking at your track automation. Down here is kind of track automation, and there's also another type of clip level automation. So this is an interesting thing here, but I talked about that in a different video, so I'm not gonna go into too much of that here. One of my other videos talks about that cool automation stuff you see down there, but we'll stick with just the simple view here. And we'll make it a little smaller because we're going to work with pan. So it's just like you would expect. Double click to add dots. You can double click up here to jump it in a kind of a clip-based way. See how it's per clip? This is a new clip. So when I double clicked up here, it just jumped the whole clip up. Within a clip, if I double click, it makes a ramp to wherever I double click. You know, you'll just learn your way around the automation, but the point is this clip automation that I'm doing is right. So even though I'm jumping across clips, I want to jump at the center of the pan range, but I've got some panning automation here. Let's do this. Okay, so I have panning automation. It's on the clip, right? If I go and expand the automation window for the track in the arranger, and I click this and I go to mixer and I go to pan, you'll see I'm looking at the pan, but there's nothing there. There's no automation at the track level for pan. So I can put some automation in there. Set this back to 0. Okay, so I start at 0, I go left, I'm sorry, right, and then I go left, and then I go back to center again. This is track automation, and it's different than what's in the clip. So these two are going to be summing together. Like the clip itself goes way right, and then goes way left and way right, and center a little bit right, and then just stays right the rest of the way. And kind of this type of panning with inside the clip is going to be going on at the same time as this panning. So for example, at this point in the clip, I'm a little bit right. So it takes these two moves to the right and makes them even more magnified. It's like multiplicative would be the best word. This is being multiplied against these, and so these effectively become a little bit higher. Now, meanwhile, over here, it's going to the left, it's going in the other direction, and that's being multiplicatively applied to this bend that's in the clip, this pan move here. So this would actually be a lot less of a slope when the two are summed together and multiplied together, right? It would slope more to like looking something like this here, and then finally by about here, it would have gone up to this point again, and maybe there'd be a little kind of, oops, let's make sure I have the line selected. Oh, come on, stop that. There we go. A little bit of a curve there, right? The multiplication would sort of make it act more like this. So just be aware that there are 4 types of modulation you can do at the clip level that are very common: gain, pan, pitch, and format. They're locked to the clip. And then if I move the clip around, zoom out a little bit. So you've got this little button right here that locks the automation or not. So if this button is on and I move this clip, the track automation moves with it. Meanwhile, the clip automation is still exactly the same. Even as I move this around, God damn it, Control Z, even as I move this around, the clip automation is staying exactly the same. But the track automation is moving to a different place. Now, and these are both pan, right? Now, if I turn this little button right here, if I turn it off, now if I move the clip, the automation stays put on the track, but the clip automation is baked into the clip, so it moves with the clip. So just be aware that there's those 2 levels of automation. They're both kind of sort of thought of as automation. Like they don't really say automation or not. They just say what's the gain, what's the pan, what's the pitch, and what's the format of this clip. So you can think of this as modulation or automation. It doesn't really, I don't think they have terminology about that. And then finally, there is a 3rd type of automation that's kind of sort of different from these two, and you only see it when you're in the automation editor panel. So when we go over here, you can see that we still have this pan automation. We can still see that we're in the mixer and it's pan and it's locked to the clip, right? You can see that when you're in this automation mode for the clip itself, it is, and again, if I go to track automation, it's showing me the automation on the track. But if I go to clip here in the editor, now it's showing me the clip automation, and that's this mode called automation editor. And I've only got a few different types that are available at the clip level. So I've got pan, I've got I'm sorry, pan's the one that's currently showing, but I've got volume, pan, mute, S1 effect. What the hell is that? I honestly don't know. I would have to look into that. I don't think I have any effects on this thing. I don't know what these two do, to tell you the truth. So you basically just have volume, pan, and mute automation when you're in this mode. But what you do have is 3 different types of automation that I talk about in another one of my other videos I've done earlier. There's this sort of absolute automation line, and if I go to pan again, where'd my pan automation go? Let's go back here. Where is my pan automation? Should be showing me pan. Let's go here. Did I somehow blow away my pan automation in all these moves? Nope. Oh, right, because it was track automation before, because I moved it. Okay. Let's go back here to the clip. Let's go back to automation mode. Let's drag this back over here. Where the hell are you? Well, maybe I was right, and it is the 3rd type of automation. Let's move this back over here. So when I'm in the event editor, I've still got this baked in pan automation on the clip as part of the events, right? If I go to the automation mode for the clip, and I go to pan, and I start setting pan here. We'll do a very obviously different curve like that. This is absolute automation being done at the level of the clip itself, the clip container, not the events. And this is useful to see too, because you'll notice when I first created it, it also duplicated that shape on the track automation. But when I move the clip, and because I have this button unchecked, when I move the clip over here, this modulation, this automation that's inside the clip is still attached to the clip, but it didn't get dragged and duplicated or moved right here. So we still have this first bit that was put on the track, but the pan automation is still in the clip. And it is different than the event level automation. If I go back here to the event editor, we still have this other type of automation. So think about this. We've got 3 different levels of automation. There's the track automation. There's the event, the automation that we put on individual samples or events inside of the clip. And then for the parent clip container itself, if we go here, this is a 3rd type of automation that's occurring at the clip level. And, oh, damn it, it disappeared again. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I kind of suspect that's a bug, because I would think this automation would still be here in the clip. That's interesting. Why did it go away? I would expect it to still be here. I may have to ask Bitwig about this, because I'm not sure what's going on. Is it because of my free versus... there we go. That's right. I remember now. This button is important. Clip automation independent from the clip loop. No, that has to do with looping behavior. Well, let's see what happens. Let's put a different automation curve here for pan. Sorry, you're going down experimental lane with me for a second. And now if I move this, I would expect this to stay. If I go to a different mode and then I come back, nope, it's gone. The points are still there. I don't know. I don't know, Shaggy. That looks... I'm not sure what's going on with that, to be honest. But what I do know is if I come here and I make an automation move that's different, and then I lock the automation to move with the clip, now if I move it, it does stay intact as I move the clip. And if I go to a different mode and show the event automation versus the clip automation, it's still there. So it's got something to do with this lock button, I guess. If it's locked, then this stays with the clip no matter where you move it. And so then this is truly a third type of automation that stays independent of the event automation. So event automation, clip automation, which could be different, and this is all kind of adding and affecting each other. And then there's the track automation, which, I don't know, can I do that differently? No, see, that's kind of locked to the clip. So I guess track and clip level automation are kind of the same thing. It's just two different ways of looking at the same information. But what is interesting about automation at the clip level is there's three different types. There's the absolute, there's the additive, and then there's, let's see, let's put a big curve here. Right? And you're kind of seeing the summed result in this shadow back here. It's like, this is the absolute automation. This is being added or subtracted from the absolute automation. So we're getting this curve that's actually a lot more like the shading. See, here we go positive by 22%. So this original line here is being multiplied by 22%. And then right through here, it's curving downward into the negative. So this original straight line is now kind of curved and following a negative slope, and so on. And then there's a third type, which is this one, which is crazy sauce, right? And so you've got three types of automation that are locked to the level of the clip container. And as we move it around, they'll move with it as long as this button's here. And the total effect can be kind of understood and seen by looking at the gray shaded thing up on the track. So you can go down rat holes with this stuff. So clip automation, three different types that affect each other. Then the event level automation for gain, pan, pitch, and format. And then, of course, there's track automation, which can be, in some cases, different or independent. So that's pretty much all I have to say about clip stuff that'll drive you, be confusing. You won't know necessarily your options. The big one for me was, doing manual cuts and fades here, and then why doesn't it bake in when I do Control-J to consolidate it? And hopefully this has been helpful and will help you see some possibilities that you can't do in Ableton, and will help you avoid some frustrations if you try and do things coming over from Ableton and you're like, how the hell do I do this in Bitwig instead? All right, hope this has been helpful. And as with all my videos, in the description below, there will be a link to my SoundCloud and Spotify. Please check out my stuff. Throw me a like or a follow. That's always super helpful. A nice way to show appreciation. And have a good one. Talk to you soon.